Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, founder of Managing the Menopause and the Triple Shift. This time I have Jo, Warner and Rob Kemp, and they are the authors of the new book, Burning Up, Frozen Out. Jo is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author, former editorial director of Men's Fitness magazine. He spent more than 2 decades working across print, digital and broadcast media, writing extensively about men's and women's health, fitness and wellbeing. Rob is a freelance journalist and author of 7 non-fiction books, including the Amazon bestselling The Expectant Dad's Survival Guide, The New Dad's Survival Guide, and The Good Guys, 50 Heroes Who Changed the World with Kindness. And he has written extensively about men's health, parenting and sport for more than 50 years. 30 years. Welcome to the podcast. I didn't want to age you by 2 decades there. That's not a good way to start, is it? Sorry, Rob.
It looks great for it. Maybe our next book should be on longevity or anti-aging.
Oh, well, it's definitely a hot topic, isn't it? But you welcome both of you to the podcast. And
thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, we don't. You're part of an exclusive group. I can probably count on the fingers of certainly 2 hands how many chaps we've had along on the podcast. But between the 2 of you, you have written a book about relationships, menopause, how men can navigate through a partner having this sort of going through this particular stage of life. What on earth made you decide to take on such a project?
Shall I take this one, Rob?
Please, Joe, yeah.
I've been working a lot around women's and men's health and well-being, and there was sort of this elephant in the room in every conversation I was having. It was like, well, Joe, this is great if someone wants to lose weight or build muscle or run faster, but what about hormones? What about perimenopause? And I sort of kept dodging the question until it appeared in my life, and it was something my partner started going through. And I was, if I'm totally honest, I was absolutely mortified by how little I knew about women's bodies in general. Despite, having a baby with my partner, I was still very much not fully aware of exactly what was going on. I think that's a really common thing for a lot of men, because you almost feel slightly bad. You don't know what's going on. So you put your head in the sand and hope you can sort of just, fake it until you make it. But then I started looking into perimenopause, specifically trying to find some advice, some guidelines on what I could do, A, to firstly understand what was happening, and then B, how I could maybe step up and support my partner more. And I couldn't believe how little there was out there. Don't get me wrong, there's a load of brilliant books out there for women, but none of them really spoke to me in a way of, needing some applicable advice, or, that very sort of men need to know that the top line, rather than getting too sort of overwhelmed and confused by all the hormonal chaos that's going on. So in the spirit of, if it doesn't exist, go out and build it. That's what we set about doing, because Rob and I had a couple of chats, and I knew Rob from way back when he first gave me some work experience at Men's Health, and we've always sort of kept in touch. And I was inspired by his dad's books, which had been just absolutely brilliant for me and many of my friends that I'd given them to, and just talking to men in men's language, in men's terms about what's going on. And I wanted to do that with perimenopause, because I didn't believe that Rob and I were the only 2 men out there who were sort of scratching our heads going, what the hell is going on? We need to know more. You're not. I think if you don't know how books work, or you don't know how communication works, that's our job. We communicate ideas and thoughts and advice to other people. If you don't have that, it's really hard to go out and find a resource that doesn't exist. Don't get me wrong, there's tons of information online now, but it's really hard to know what you can trust. It's not like the old days where there was a filter in terms of what you could maybe access. So that's really the start of the journey, right, Rob? It was basically trying to give men the advice and the understanding to start to get their head around what was going on. And then I think with anything, a little bit of education goes an awful long way. And that's how we've structured the book very much. The first section is it's called Knowledge, and it's just about what's going on. And not just with her and her hormones, but we also touch upon what happens to men in midlife as well. I want to get it very, very clear from the outset. We are not comparing what men go through hormonally in any way, shape or form to what women go through. But men's testosterone does decline a little bit. And also, if you're not really happy with your life, or you're dealing with stress or not, obviously these things all compound for both men and women. So I wanted to kind of set the scene of what's going on, so men and women could understand each other. And then the second section is all about communication, which is basically how to start talking about these things and what to say and what phrases not to use. Because I think a lot of men put their head in the sand. Maybe you've tried once or twice to say the right thing or do the right thing and it's backfired. And sometimes it's easier to sort of back away than step forward and find out what's going on. So we talk about communication, not only with each other, but also with medical professionals. And then the final section is called power. And that's basically what's in your control in terms of how you can, maximize sleep, minimize stress, and eat and exercise, just to have some more control over your life, to feel like, a little bit more positive, a little bit more confident. So that's my very sort of long-winded explanation of how we've ended up in this point. But long story short, the resource didn't exist to help men. And, if we've never been told this stuff, it's very, very difficult to know what to do. And I get that, a lot of some comments we've had, especially I've had on social, well, men should know what to do already. Why can't they just step up? I don't have the capacity to tell them what to do. We totally get all that. And that should be the end goal. That is absolutely what men should be doing. It is just taking on more and doing more stuff naturally. But if you've got no idea where to begin, I think it's really, really daunting to make that first step. And that's why Burning Up Frozen Out exists, really, just to give men, I guess, the knowledge, the language and the confidence to start stepping up and start showing up in a way that makes a really tangible difference.
Yeah.
I think, the only other point I'd add with what Joe said is when we first started talking about this, aside from what I'd been through personally with my wife, there were so many similarities between the experiences I had when I was writing the book for expectant and new dads, and for the partners of women who are going through perimenopause. And it was that there was, as Joe points out, there's a lack of knowledge on our part about how the female body works. And more crucially, there's a whole exposure to a medical world that our partners, our wives, are not used to, we're not used to. There's the psychological impact of pregnancy and the fact that one woman's pregnancy is different to another. There are so many similarities I've found between perimenopause and pregnancy that the idea of putting together this book in a way that the previous books had worked for dads, when Joe first mooted it, I thought it was a great idea.
And we might well focus quite a lot of this chat around the kind of communication, which is the sort of the middle part, as you've already talked about. And I think, we don't get taught this stuff when we're younger. We don't get taught any of this stuff when we're about to go into a relationship. Weirdly, one of the best things actually that we ever did before we got married was something called the marriage course. And I generally run a mile from organised religion in any way, shape or form, but it was kind of mediated through the church. But it essentially taught us a lot of those communication skills that we still rely on today, 17 years later. But for lots of people, we don't get taught how to communicate well, particularly for men. It probably doesn't come sort of as naturally as it might do for a lot of women. And so we really do need that focus. This is why books like this are so needed, to kind of giving people a bit of scaffolding. And I love, some of the, you've got lots of great sort of suggested phrases, sort of how to ask specific questions, how to ask better questions, things not to say. So I'm sure for a lot of people reading that, actually, it might feel a little bit like ABC spelling those things out, but actually I imagine it's incredibly helpful to have, not that you want to kind of go in there with a bit of paper and a script, but just to be a bit like, I'm rabbit in the headlights. I don't know kind of even where to start and not make things worse.
I think often because of when the menopause kicks in, that time in life, you are, as a relationship, as a couple, spinning so many plates that some of the basic stuff around communication has got lost in the midst of kids and issues with parents, because quite often it's that generation whereby maybe the kids are going to university or leaving home or going for exams and stresses in their relationship.
There's a lot.
Parents are having health issues, etc. So much of that maelstrom is going on. The idea of just sitting down and having conversations or knowing how to say the right thing at the right time, choosing your moments, and that's just the day-to-day stuff. Never mind when we're now looking at one of our partners is going through perimenopause.
I think that what you said there, Emma, was really interesting, and exactly my experience in the interviews that we did. It's like, it sounds really simple, and I can't tell you the number of interviews I had with brilliant communication relationship experts, and they'd finish talking and I'd sort of go, of course, you've not told me anything revolutionary. It's almost that repeated light bulb moment of, I don't know why I didn't talk like that now, but my point is sometimes you need somebody else just to say it, just to give you another option, because I think we spend our whole lives growing up, before we even meet our partner, having these conversations in our head about how we communicate and how we say these things. And then sometimes it's really easy to lose sight of, am I actually saying what I mean here? Am I actually saying this in the best way? And what we've done with the book is there is tons of applicable advice, but we never say, do this, then do this, and then do this. It's basically, we wanted to create a menu of all these really, really useful tips that you can pick and choose based on how you want to deal with the situation, or how life is planning out, or what you think your partner needs. It's almost like cherry picking the bits that are relevant for you. But I think just on communication, I always come back to this in every single conversation I had in research with the book, or with guys I'm talking to since the book's come out, is once they read in the book that their job isn't to fix anything, you can almost see the weight of the world lift off their shoulders. And I think I'm really conscious when we're talking about men and women and midlife and relationships that I'm not blanket statementing that all men are like this or all women are like this. But in my experience, men have a sort of default of, she has a problem, my job is the solution.
And I've written that down, like this need to fix things. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but generally I think it does hold true.
There's definitely something in it. And I think if there is one thing that, listeners to this could go and tell their partner, or men listening to this is not something that gets fixed. This is something that as a team, you work through together. And I think as soon as you remove that pressure, you get out of a solutions mindset into a support mindset. Suddenly you're on the same wavelength a little bit. Because I think a lot of the midlife, as Rob said there, it's never a big argument or a big blow up. It's until you hit midlife, you're almost sometimes communicating telepathically. You just get each other, you know what you want, and then you throw in the elderly parents and the young kids and the financial pressure and the work stress and everything else, and people pulling you in a million directions, and it's almost like someone's frequency goes off and the other one's frequency goes off, and it's just really hard to be on that same wavelength. But I think if you can get out of that solutions mindset, men especially, and I wish I learned this sooner because it would have saved me an awful lot of heartache. But it's about, what does that person need? If my partner is coming home and she's ranting about something at work, I always used to go, well, have you told your boss he's an absolute whatever? Or, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? And I could just see the colour draining from her face because she didn't want my input. She either wanted to rant, or she wanted distraction, or she just wanted someone outside of the work circle to hear her and understand what she was feeling. And it's that light bulb moment. It's that active listening instead of jumping into solutions mode. And it's what I love about this is it's really easy. It's actually easier not to give solutions, because you don't, like men, you don't have to think. You just literally have to. I say this to my 4-year-old kid all the time. He's nearly 5. Listening ears on, and it's almost like put the listening ears on and start listening. And then as we talk about in the book, and I know this is something you highlighted. It's if you're worried about getting it wrong, ask for a direction. Do you want help? Do you want a hug? Do you want to be heard? From Jessica Barrett. Brilliant advice, memorable advice that we're not expecting to fix everything. We can't fix everything. But with a little bit of communication, what do you need? I can do that. Let's do that. Suddenly you begin to put the pieces back into place that maybe have been missing for a little while.
Yeah. And listening well is a real skill. And again, it kind of comes back to that sort of communication piece of, we don't get taught this stuff. You have to either learn the hard way, or you go out and you seek this information. And actually, there's another book which I read earlier this year, which is brilliant. It's called Listen by Dr. Catherine Mannix. It is just so good in terms of, actually learning how to really properly, deeply listen to somebody, especially in a sort of a difficult sort of situation, or where there's not a kind of a clear path forwards, because so many of us, we're listening to kind of when's my bit to kind of jump into the gap in the conversation, not actually, am I giving this person my full, undivided, generative attention so that I can really understand what's going on for them.
And that's what we talk about in the book. As Rob said, day to day, it's very, very hard to carve out those minutes. And quite often in midlife, you and your partner are running a logistics company, right? Who needs picking up, who's doing this, who's doing that? You're not actually talking about what's going on in your head or together. So we talk in the book about, carving out some time where you're not sitting down opposite each other on the kitchen table after a rushed dinner. And it feels like an interrogation or an interview. It's getting side by side. It's going for a walk. It's going for a coffee. It's regular things that you put in your diary like you would an appointment, and treating that time as sacrosanct, because everyone's busy, but we've all got the same amount of hours in the day. It's all about what's important to you. It's about priorities, and it's so easy for your relationship to not just fall down that to-do list because you take it for granted. We all do, because we've been in the same person for a while. They're not going to run away tomorrow, so it's okay. You're sort of in damage limitation. But by switching it around and going, actually, do you know what? This conversation or going for a coffee is more important than doing the food shop or putting the hoover around, or anything else that one of you might need to do. You're just building in those anchors. It doesn't need to be every day, but once a week or whenever, is like, that's your time. And all of the people I spoke to for the book, if they could swear by one thing they were never ever going to remove from their diary, it was the Thursday morning coffee or the Friday afternoon lunch. And I get that it's difficult with working and all these other things, but if you can just carve out a little bit of time just for that check-in with each other. And we do something in the book called the midlife MOT, and it's almost, it sounded really cheesy, and we were sort of back and forth about whether to include it. But what I found in the people I've got to do, very simply, it's a weekly list of kind of physical and mental attributes of how you're feeling in your body, how you're feeling in your mind, how connected you are, how social you're feeling, how stressed you're feeling. And the point is, once a week you sit down with your partner and you go through it and you give yourself a score. And what I love about it is, it's designed as a communication tool, so you can see how the other person is doing and where they might be struggling or where they're thriving. Because quite often it's really hard to sit down and go, I am struggling with A, B, C, D, and E, because then you're in solution mode. But if someone else is just giving themselves a score of, do you know what, my stress is a 3 this week, I'm really, really quite struggling with that, or my joints feel great, I'm an 8, I can maybe exercise a bit more, whatever it might be. So it's designed as to find out how the other person's doing. But the feedback I've had is, I found it really valuable to sit down and actually assess how I'm feeling, because we are on the treadmill all the time, just going from one job to one job to one thing that needs our time or attention. And just sitting down for 5 minutes and giving yourself a score from 1 to 10 on a number of things, it's like, I'm taking a breather in a way that I guess mindfulness or meditation works. You're just stopping for a second. And I love this little tool. And like I said, you only need to do it once a week over a coffee. Is you and your partner can then go, he's really struggling with that. I had no idea. Why didn't you say? And it's like, I didn't know how to bring it up. And it's that entry point into a conversation, because as Rob said, when life is busy, can we sit down and have the chat? No, I don't want to do that. That sounds awful. That sounds like it's going to be hard work. It's going to be upsetting. But if you get a sense the other person is really struggling on maybe some anxiety, or maybe they're not sleeping well, or maybe work's really bad and they hadn't had the chance to tell you about it, you're basically giving yourself an opportunity to then have a conversation without all of the pressure and the stress of trying to bring something up. So that's what we've tried to do with the book, is put things like that in really applicable fun little games, almost, in a way that can go, you're struggling with that. Okay, I'm struggling with that too. Let's put aside some time where we can talk about it, because most people are just looking for that gateway into talking about something without all the hassle of making it a big drama.
Rob, maybe tell us about the traffic light tool, because I think that's another really nice one.
Well, to be honest with you, that is more of a Joe speciality, that one. The point I was going to make regarding the communication thing, and it was one when I was interviewing friends and talking to guys whose partners have been going through the menopause and their experiences of it. And one of them, I remember John saying to me, his wife he came home, she was sat there, she had the fan on, she was sat in her vest, she had a fan in the front room, she was just trying to cool herself down. And she was just trying to explain to him what she was going through, and she couldn't. She was just trying to tell him that she doesn't feel like herself. And it was just, she just wanted that to change. And he just said to me, I didn't have anything. All I said to her was, can I make you a cup of tea? That's all I had. And it was from that conversation we had with him that I was realising, actually, this, as Joe points out, you need to make those moments to try and talk about these things, but also knowing what to say and how to say it, and just to get that conversation going. And I think that's something we touch along quite well in the book, is just starting those conversations and as you point out, just listening well and taking on board what they're going through and how they're feeling about it. I had no idea when my wife was going through the anxiety element of the menopause, I didn't even know that was a thing. I don't think she did to an extent. And I assumed that she was worried about various other things and not realising that this was just a symptom of an underlying issue. And when we did finally get to sit down and talk about it, after she'd been to a GP 3 or 4 times and been told to cut down on her coffee and various other things without never being asked, when did you last have a period, or anything that would have taken them in the right direction, then we could start having these conversations. But up until that point, we just weren't making the time to do it because, as we were saying, plates are spinning all the time.
I don't know about you, Rob, but another bit of feedback I've had from guys who have read the book, and I think this, and again, I'm not being an apologist for men here at all, but until you really sit down and get your head around the symptoms, I think it's really difficult for men to understand what it's like, because there is nothing comparable at all in terms of not just the physical symptoms, because everyone talks about the night sweats and the hot flushes, but that sense of like complete dread, or not recognizing yourself in the mirror, or having thoughts that maybe you don't love your kids anymore. All these things were said to me. And I think for men, another mistake they make, without wanting to bash them again, but another mistake they make is they just don't take it seriously, or they find some of the symptoms almost sound comical, and the reaction is almost,
it can't be that bad. Oh, you've got an itchy ear.
How can it be? Oh, your metal taste. I mean, and it's like the feedback of, once they'd read the first couple of chapters where we talk about what's actually going on and what the symptoms are, and we try to do it in a way that's not scary and just makes it feel real, is, oh my God, I had no idea. And it's almost, they started to see their partner's troubles in a different light. There was instantly more empathy, because once you understand, or once you can begin to, and we do paint a picture of, imagine this was happening to your body, how would you feel? Because I think with men, sometimes you need to really plant that image of what it's like. And we can't understand, we never can, but that doesn't mean we can't be empathetic about it. And I think understanding of just how awful it can be, sometimes for men is like, do you know what? I'm going to treat this a little bit more seriously. I'm not going to dismiss this. I'm not going to say, pull yourself together. The amount of times I'm tired too. It's like, no, you're not. And having that awareness and that sympathy, I think, of just how difficult it is, that's another way to open the door to a conversation, because it's really difficult for us until you properly understand what's going on. Just to really get the scale and the severity of what so many women are dealing with.
Yeah, and you've got quite a nice way of framing it when you're talking about some of those symptoms. It's like, what it feels like, what causes it, what makes it worse, what helps. And I think that's, kind of stepping through that really, really kind of helps to flesh that out a bit more. If that's something that they're not going to experience, at least trying to kind of have a better, clearer sense of what that might feel like in someone else's body is really helpful.
And I think this is where men have a superpower in many respects, because we're actually best placed to spot what's going on before she is. And when I spoke to Louise Newsom for the book and Kate Muir for the book, both of them didn't recognise perimenopause in themselves. And I think that's another thing men struggle to understand, and whether it's because you're so in the mire and you've got a million things going on in your head, and maybe there's a slight element of denial, or maybe you've been gaslit by the GP. Us fellas are perfectly positioned to go, hang on, she's not sleeping. She's getting really, really stressed about what I see in minor things. She's saying that things taste different. Like we're the Sherlock Holmes here to sit and start putting it all together. And I think that's where men can really start to step up, is if you start to join the dots, long before she does, then you're on the path to doing something about it, whether that's HRT or whatever path you want to go down, rather than going, oh my God, she's gone crazy, put my head in the sand, and have another 2 or 3 years of her just increasingly thinking that she's going insane or she's dying, or all these other thoughts that women shared with me. I think it's really useful to know some of the symptoms, not only so you can begin to help, but so you can spot what's going on and start joining those dots.
Rob, do you think a lot of men are quite scared to broach that, to have that conversation with a partner initially?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. Yeah, in my experience, it's also a case of just, one is that not knowing exactly what is going on. quite often we'll just turn it on ourselves. Is it about me? What have I done? We quite often think, this is the relationship coming to an end because of something that we've said or done or whatever. We're quite good at turning it on ourselves and making it a bit personal when it's really not. So that, I think, and because we're so these days kind of reliant on, well, if we've got a problem, there's a medical profession, there's Dr. Google, whatever. There's a fix out there, and as we were saying earlier, men have this kind of instant, quick fix mindset with these things. So to get to a situation where even our wives or partners aren't even sure what's going on with them, they're not getting the feedback from the medical establishment to point them in the right direction. So it's a whole it's a mystery for them. Therefore, it's even more of a mystery for us, and I think that's quite unnerving. I think also I found in our situation that I was getting worried about the fact that she wasn't just changing in a reaction to symptoms, but in our relationship, it was just becoming more fractious, more just arguments over nothing really. And at the time, it felt like, okay, this is the relationship moving in another direction, with absolutely no idea that this is a hormonal influence. This is what the menopause can do. It can cause this friction within a relationship, especially if I, on my part, don't really know what I'm doing, don't really know if what I'm saying is the right thing or not, and quite often it wasn't. It's a really unnerving time, I think, for a lot of men. And also, as we say in the book, it's not just husbands and partners, but it's close friends, it's sons of women who are going through the menopause, especially those guys who are living at home a little longer now. Work colleagues, bosses, and this kind of thing. It's an unknown. It's an unknown for the woman who's going through it. So it's even more so for the men who are around her. And if they don't know how to communicate and ask the right question and just ask how they're doing, they'll step away or they put their head in the sand. And that's why it becomes quite an unnerving situation for the partner in particular.
Yeah, and you touched on something there, and obviously it is, we know that there's quite a big correlation in terms of breakdown of relationships, divorces, and kind of what's going on in that sort of perimenopause, menopause space. I think you do speak to this in the book. I think for men, sort of the sex part of a relationship and that kind of the connection that you get from that, they see that in a very different way. And again, we're kind of generalizing to the way that women look at the kind of the sexual component of a relationship. And so if that bit goes awry, that's kind of very, very deeply felt as a kind of a rejection and a sign, that there's something horrendously wrong in this relationship. Either, they've kind of gone off me, I must have done something wrong. And I think that is a big part of that kind of breakdown of communication. It can be a real kind of flashpoint, I think, for that breakdown of communication.
Earlier, when you've got so many plates spinning, quite often a few times when there is kind of intimacy and interaction, or when you do get together, is moments of intimacy, and that obviously changes. And quite often that will be, as we spoke to one of the relationships counsellors in the book said, quite often the man will say, she's changed, she's not the woman I married, kind of thing. And as the counsellor pointed out, well, you've changed, you're not the person she's married, and that's just part of how relationships work, and they change over time. But if the times when you were spending those intimate moments together, that goes as well, just the libido changes within both of you possibly, and you're just not having sex as routinely, as regularly as you were, or if not at all, then you, as a man, and your instant reaction is, what have I done wrong here? Why am I being pushed aside? Why am I being pushed away? Kind of thing. And your partner, she doesn't quite understand why she's going through this, why her feelings and desires are changing as well. Again, it's one of those things where I didn't realise to the extent at the time when I was going through it, what we were going through, how it would impact on us in every single aspect of our lives. I kind of knew, like Joe says, things, stereotypical stuff about hot flushes and this kind of thing. But for sex, just to sort of, for want of a better term, dry up, it just felt like everything that we were about together for all that time was just growing further and further apart. And I think that happens in a lot of relationships, which is why, as the statistics you point out, is part of the link between marital breakdown at this time. There's couples quite often to go in different directions, and unless they can kind of find way to communicate and getting it back together, then that goes to the finite extent.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Rob, in terms of sex is something that you do in a relationship and it's completely natural and you don't think about it and you don't talk about it when you first get together and maybe, you know, that honeymoon period. It's just what you do and it's what you love doing. And then I think there's so much sort of social pressure and cultural pressure on sex that as soon as you feel like you've got to talk about it, then it's already broken. Because why are we having to talk about it? It should just be happening. But of course, we're not only just talking about the stress and the lack of sleep and all the other things in midlife. You throw in that hormonal, you know, maelstrom, and then of course things are going to change. And I think for men, it's really useful to understand how much her body is changing, and this is not a mental thing that she doesn't fancy you. It's that the thought of sex can be repulsive. You know, we know all this because we've seen the research, and there's tons of stories out there from women who have just completely lost interest because of the pain or for whatever reason. And I think this is where the book is really about communication, whether we're talking about exercise, nutrition, or dealing with a doctor or intimacy. It's really useful, I think, for men to realize that, again, sweeping statement, but men and women think about sex very differently, right? I think we say in the book, it's men are spontaneous. It's a sudden thought and you can be like, right, I'm in the mood here. Whereas a lot of women need the sizzle, as we call it. They might need 24, 48, 72 hours of build up and anticipation, especially when there's a lot going on. It's not like you flick a switch. And the trouble is, this is kind of what I was saying earlier, and it's applicable to so many things. It's that wavelength thing. It's like he's up for it, but she is like 3 days of kind of foreplay away from being even ready to have that conversation. So he's tried, and it's taken its rejection and feels bad because, you know, with men, ego is tied up into whatever. Whereas she feels, or how dare he just pounce on me? Doesn't he know how stressed I am? Or was he not listening to anything what we were saying? So I think there's that disconnect. And I think another issue that, again, it's quite obvious when you say it out loud, but sometimes is hidden in a relationship, is men sometimes seek connection through intimacy. They think, well, if we can have sex, then we'll be back closer together. Where many women look at it the other way. I need connection before I can be intimate. And it's that disconnect of, well, if we have sex, everything will be fine. And it's like, well, we need to be fine before we have sex. And again, everyone's different. Every relationship is different. I found that a really useful thing to think about in terms of, how do we talk about sex? How do I understand where she's coming from and what her needs are? And how do we take the pressure off it, or whatever it might be? And speaking to some amazing relationship experts, it was always take the pressure off. This used to come naturally. This will come naturally again. But if you're not communicating, if you're not on the same wavelength, it's going to take a little bit more time. And I think a lot of men go, well, we can fix this. All we need to do is just, you know, get it on as quickly as possible and everything will be fine. And I think if men realize that actually a lot of women need it the other way around, and also then likewise, if women realize, okay, he's thinking like that, we need to have a chat about how it's not going to work like that for me, or there's other things we can do. Again, understanding is taking the pressure off here. And I think the more you try and force something, or the more worried you are about it, or the more you put your head in the sand, it obviously becomes far, far more difficult to reconnect and get that intimacy back.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, and maybe this isn't, I don't think this is as explicitly sort of spelled out in your book, is this sort of drop in estrogen and the impact that has, not on sort of specific symptoms per se, but on, you know, kind of what I talk about, you know, what are we as women prepared to put up with in a relationship? So, you know, it could be, well, you never used to moan about XYZ. I'm like, you never used to be quite so strident and kind of forceful about thing A over there. You never used to care, you know, when I left my muddy football boots or whatever, and you know, they were there for 4 days. And it's like, our threshold for putting up with stuff has completely changed. And I think adjusting to that change, because it can impact so many things across a relationship, I think is quite hard for partners to sort of wrap their head around and go, but this was fine 10 years ago. Why is it not fine now?
And this is where I think men do themselves a massive disservice by apportioning all the blame. She's changed. No, she's not putting up with this anymore. As you say, it was always fine. And I know you mentioned the traffic light list, and I'll really quickly explain this, because this is brilliant, not only for just your relationship, but also for intimacy, because it can work on that front as well. Very, very simply, you need to sit down with your partner, over a coffee or maybe a glass of wine, and you've got a traffic light list, and your green things are things that your partner does that you just adore, that just make you feel valued, make you feel good, make you feel seen, make you feel heard. It could be as simple as, doing the dishwasher when it's someone else's turn, or, without being stereotypical, doing more of the household, or just turning up with a bunch of flowers once in a blue moon. And you do it for each other. So there'll be things that he does for her and vice versa. You then have the amber list of, well, that doesn't really annoy me, but if you do too many of them at once, or there's other stuff going on, it can really jar me off. And then there's the red list of, like, when you do this, I want to just call the divorce lawyer straight away.
With a spoon.
Exactly. Yeah, what I love about this is that could be, on her red list, might be the way you eat a packet of crisps. Because, as we know, what
is it about the crisps? I mean, literally, if you said what is it the way you've written it in the book? Because I pulled it out, and you're eating a packet of crisps. She looks at you like you just trod dog poo through the house. I mean, it is.
But Emma, this is why I think that this little game is absolutely invaluable, because now you have the red list, and there is massive chance that some of the things, I hate it when he starts telling the end of my joke because he tells it better. Like, that's a genuinely thing you can go, do you know what, hands up, I shouldn't really do that, I'll stop doing that. But the eating crisps, he might be going, I had absolutely no idea. I just thought you hated me from the way you stared at me. And I know now that when I get hungry late at night and I want a bowl of crunchy nut cornflakes, I go and eat that at the opposite end of the house. And that's fine.
Well done.
Because now I know that that's something that can really jar my partner off. I'm not going to do it. And I think this list is incredibly useful. Like I said, it's fun, but you actually get some eyeballs on the other person's thought process of, I had no idea you loved it when I send you a text message at the middle of the day to check in. I can do that. That's absolutely no problem. Or I love it when you, I don't know, whatever it might be, pick one of 1,000 jobs we all have to do each day. But I think it's more useful for the red list of, I had no idea you hated that, or I had no idea that drove you balmy, because I can easily not do that. I can easily take my shoes off before I come in, or I can easily do X, Y, and Z. And I think the goal of so many of these tools and little games we put in the book, it's that gateway conversation. It's that starter for 10. How do you bring up something that really is getting your goat? And to use it on the intimacy angle as well. You can be with someone for a decade and still not really know their major turn-ons and turn-offs, because sometimes you go through the motions, or sometimes it's hit and miss. But by sitting down and going, Joe, I love it when you do this, or I'm not that bothered when you do this, or I really don't. I don't need to go into too many specifics here, but you as a fella, you might learn something that really turns your partner on that you had no idea about. That it's just another way of making you both feel connected. And again, it's all about communication. I know what I want. I know what you want. These are this is the Venn diagram of stuff we both love. Let's focus on that, whether or not that's going out for dinner once a week, or going to the movies like we used to, or, going for a weekend away where we went when we first got together, or doing more of this to be intimate. All we're really trying to do is say, just open up, give a little bit of yourself. And I think, men really have an issue with being vulnerable. And I think some of the games that we do in this book, games isn't the right word, but tools or activities, you have to be a bit vulnerable. So I think we're trying to reframe it as, you're not being vulnerable, you're being available. That doesn't have that kind of sort of negative connotation that some men attach to the word vulnerable. So I think if we're trying to do one thing with this book, it's like, step back and see the bigger picture. You're not going to fix everything. You can't fix everything. You can't make things better overnight. It's going to take patience, and it's nobody's fault. And once you can kind of get rid of those big obstacles, I think sometimes the path can illuminate itself a little bit better. And then, like I said, with these activities, these joint activities, you're just getting a little bit of a better insight of what makes the other person tick. Because as Rob said, if you've been together 10, 15, 20 years, you have changed. The things you like have changed. The things you don't like might have changed. And we're sort of bundling through life most of the time with blinkers on, just trying to get from one weekend to the next. Taking a step back and realizing this is important to me, or that's important to you, I'm going to make it more important to me. I mean, without being melodramatic, these are the things that make or break a relationship.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you both one last question. And you can decide who goes first. What do you think was the most surprising thing that came up for you researching and writing the book?
Rob, do you want to go first while I think?
Put you on the spot.
I think the lack of awareness in the medical profession towards asking the right questions of women who are presenting with symptoms. I wasn't aware of that, and I know there are changes afoot now. And as we put the book together, it's now becoming part and parcel of check-ins with GPs to ask the right questions. But when I was talking to friends, and again, my wife's own situation as well, it was quite scary how little attention was given to what was symptoms of the menopause, not necessarily the immediate ones, but not the right questions being asked. It seems something that happens to half the world's population, and has done since the dawn of time, has really not been addressed. And I think that first port of call, because as much as we've written a book for guys to try, partners and husbands to help as much as they can, that first port of call for most women will be their GP. And unlike men, they're used to exposure to their GP from an early age, from getting the pill or whatever, and going through periods, etc. So their interaction with medical profession is much different to men. So they're used to turning to them for trust and for advice and for help and for support. And to go to a GP and them not to be asking the right questions, or to be, in my wife's case, diagnosed with depression and given sertraline, that wasn't what was happening. She didn't have a major issue with how much coffee she drank. It was the anxiety caused by the hormonal changes that were going on, part and parcel of the menopause. And speaking to so many couples who found that was the case was, I think, was the biggest surprise for me. I just wasn't aware of how much work needed to be done when it comes to day-to-day interaction with GPs, and just them knowing to ask the right questions of women who are at perimenopause or menopause age.
And I guess and I think you do sort of address this in the book, that it is something practical that men can do, is to be that kind of co-advocate, if you like, whether that's kind of helping someone prepare for those, or kind of helping them push back if they're not getting the right advice, or even going along to appointments with them. I know, I think it was Sarah Graham who talked in her book Rebel Bodies about, research that was done on attitudes of medical professionals when there was a man in the room with a woman and it was the woman's appointment. It shouldn't be like that, but if that's works as an option for a couple to go along together, that can be really kind of powerfully supportive.
Yeah, as Amanda said to me, will you come along? Because I've got brain fog. I mean, you can go to your GP and you can't remember why you've gone to your GP, or to talk about the key symptoms or the things that were worrying about you. So we'd kind of made notes and had conversations and this kind of thing. But yeah, it's crucial if you can step up and help in that way as well.
I'd echo everything Rob said there, and that is why we've dedicated one chapter to called Dealing with the Doctor, and it is all about what might happen and being prepared and writing down a list of symptoms, or writing down the things that you want answers to, and asking about available treatment options, because the stats around getting medical treatment right around this is, as we all know, is absolutely scandalous. And I think, to answer your question, Emma, what surprised me the most, one, it wasn't how little men knew, it was how little women knew. And I couldn't quite believe women are entering this crucial part of their life so ill-equipped. And that ties in with, as I said, how scandalous it can be in dealing with a medical professional. But I'm always glass half full. So my surprising thing, I think, to be honest, hand on heart, it was how empowered I felt, because it was something that I think men have been silent bystanders for so long on this. And I think it's because we feel useless, or we don't want to get it wrong. But the more I spoke to amazing experts, the more research I did, the more it dawned on me that actually I can really make a difference here. And like a lot of people, feeling useful is incredibly it's just a nice thing to do, right? It's great to help out other people, especially when it's, the most important person in your life, or certainly one of them. So for me, it was realizing that this wasn't hopeless. There was a way through it, but there wasn't going to be a way through it without some knowledge and without some tools. And I think communication, like any skill, is something you've got to work on. It doesn't just happen. A lot of blokes are perfectly happy to go and spend 3 hours practicing their golf swing. Well, maybe we need to spend a bit more time working on how we listen, which sounds crazy because we all think we're great listeners. We're not. That's why we get into so many arguments and why we miss things. So I think that would be my one takeaway for men listening, and also for women listening. It's there's an awful lot in your control here, but it takes support. This is not something you can do alone. And I'm very, very lucky in many respects that I was able to speak to so many experts, but it was heartbreaking to hear the stories of people who were so isolated and relationships falling apart. And we know it happens. Our book is obviously not a panacea for the whole of midlife, but hopefully it's going to give a few tactics, a few tips, and some reassurance that we're all going through this together at different parts of the journey and different symptoms showing up. But we don't have to do it alone. And I think once you realize you're not alone and there are things within your control, that's how any change happens, right? It's a little bit more confidence. It's a little bit better of a conversation. It's a little bit more understanding. And that's how we nudge the needle and move towards that second half of life that we all want to be better than the first.
Yeah, well, that seems like a perfect place to wrap up. Thank you, Joe and Rob, so much. And I know I'll put in the show notes, you've got a website specifically for the book where people can download your midlife MOT. And are there other resources there that people can take away?
Yeah, at the moment, there's chapter 4 is all about men and the midlife crisis, because we put something in the book that just explained what's going on with men, I think because they need to know, but also I think it's a really great way of showing that you're both going through changes. Like I said, they're not the same, but I think once a man and a woman can get on the team wavelength, it's obviously a massively helpful step forward. So you can get chapter 4 for free at the website. It's burningupfrozenout.com. And Rob and I are on social, and our emails are on there as well. Like, we love talking to people about this stuff. So if anyone's got any questions or wanted any more information about any of the communicational stuff we talk about in the book, we love talking about it. As you can probably tell from this, you've barely got a word in edgeways, right? Sorry about that.
That's how it's meant to be. Well, I hope you have a sort of a relationship-ometer kind of in the coming years, and people write in and tell you how many marriages or partnerships you've saved through your book, because I don't doubt that there will be many. And so if you're listening to this and you think your partner would find it helpful, maybe send them a not so unsubtle hint and send them a link to the podcast and to the book. Thank you again, both, for your time so much. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed the book. I think it's excellent. Yeah, you've clearly written it with a kind of a slightly kind of jokey, blokey tone in some places, and I'm guessing that's quite deliberate to sort of not scare people off too much by going dry and kind of scientific. But
yeah, we definitely wanted to avoid that textbook, because there's a lot men don't need to know about why the hormones are changing or what's going on. What we really need to know is that top line. And I know that the book is written by men for men, but it's been lovely to hear women reading it, like you, Emma. I've had some lovely feedback from women saying, do you know what, this has made me see things in a slightly different light. Because I think the women's books, don't get me wrong, are absolutely amazing, but sometimes it is a bit clinical. It's about what's happening. It's about the biology and the physiology, which is obviously important. Our hook was always about that real world application of what does it mean for your partner? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for you together? So it's been a real kind of cherry on top of the cake, hearing from women who've loved the book as well. Just, we can't get enough information. We need to really know what's going on. I think hopefully having some male voices contributing to the conversation can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you both very much, and congratulations on the book launch.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Middling Along podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go and leave us a review over at Apple Podcasts. You can check out the full back catalogue of all our episodes over at midlingalong.com. You can also find out more about my work as a coach. Go to www.thetripleshift.org.